All right, hello everyone. Tyler King here with the Denver Gazette, back with another Colorado Buffaloes game preview video. And this week, the Buffs have number 22 Iowa State coming to Boulder for a very important game for both sides. And I will get to the preview in a little bit with Eugene Rapay from the Des Moines Register, who covers the Cyclones just about as well as anybody. So stick around for that. But before I get to that, I wanted to recap the TCU game a little bit because just some context. I feel bad. Didn't have another second straight week. Didn't have a game, a preview, or sorry, a recap video on the feed immediately after the game. Just with some of the kickoffs around that 5:30 Mountain Time start. I always got to get my writing in before I do the video. And by the time I got down to the field to do my video, they were closing it off and getting ready to turn the sprinklers on. So the nice grounds people there at TCU warned me before I went on the field that I would be soaking wet. So and by that point, I had to head back to my hotel, had an early flight the next morning back to Denver, and just with some early stuff going on this week, just wasn't able to get a recap video up. But so I'll just give some of my thoughts here before we get to the Iowa State preview portion of today's video. Before I do that, just make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, like I said, comment. Let me know how you guys are feeling after TCU heading into Iowa State this week, as the Buffs have one more game before their first bye week of the season coming up next weekend. Buffs are 2-4 now, 0-3 in the Big 12. Not sure anybody saw this game, the season going this way. I think I had the Buffs at 4-2 at this point. And I know Coach Prime, which we obviously want to wish him well. He said after the game against TCU that he felt like his blood clots are back, and that came to fruition with his doctor appointment earlier this week. He had a procedure on Tuesday afternoon to remove some of that. He said he was, looking forward to the laughing gas or whatever they given to put him under for what was a multi-hour, I think a 4 or 5 hour procedure to remove some blood clots in his left leg. So I mean, he's been back at practice this week. That's you can certainly never question that guy's toughness and commitment. So it'll be great to see him back on the sidelines once again this week. I mean, he hasn't missed a beat despite some of the ongoing health issues that he's dealt with for the last couple of years. So obviously, want to wish him the best. But he is certainly not pleased with his current Buffs team. Another game in which they led by multiple scores, and another game in which they blew late in the game and just couldn't finish. Just for context, where the post-game press conference is set up is kind of right outside the Buffs locker room at TCU. And, 2 years ago, that was a really fun kind of setup when you're hearing all the music in the background, all the guys partying and celebrating after that epic win to kick off that 2023 season. And this year, we're getting down there right after the game, rushing down, as soon as the clock hits all 4 zeros. And, you hear people going in the locker room, and you just hear it's the same stuff. It's the same stuff. You hear people just on the team just so frustrated with the way that game ended. Like I said, taking a 14-0 lead in the second quarter, leading 14-0 with 3 minutes to go in the first half. And by the time halftime rolls around, Caden Salter's thrown not one, but two, but 3 interceptions. One of them sets up a second TCU touchdown to tie the game at 14. And then the third one comes at the goal line with the Buffs, on the verge of regaining the lead and taking what would have been a deserved lead into the halftime locker room. I just thought they were the better team in the first half. But it was just inconsistent play, and it's consistently the same inconsistent stuff, whether it's offensively, having some impressive drives early in the game, and then just that kind of fizzling out. Like I said, you see they get the 2 touchdown drives early in the second quarter, and then after that they only score once the rest of the game. Like I said, they had the turnover inside the 5-yard line at the end of the half, and just it was a pretty demoralizing probably feeling going into the locker room, knowing they should have been up, if not one touchdown, multiple touchdowns, because, the running game was working. I felt like Dallin Hayden, in his first real action of the season, played well. Micah Welch was still picking up yards. Caden Salter was scrambling when he needed to, although he didn't really have a ton of room to scramble in that game. TCU did a good job kind of setting the edge and making him become a passer. But, he was able to find Omarion Miller downfield, who had a pretty big game, trusted him. And the CU defense, I felt like, played pretty well up until the end of the game. I mean, this is an explosive TCU offense. Josh Hoover, I think, is one of the better quarterbacks in the conference. He's got a couple really good wide receivers with Eric McAllister and Joseph Manjack. Each of those guys had at least one touchdown in the game this past week. And I thought CU did a good job keeping that offense in check, getting some timely 3-and-outs as well. But if you're going to poke one issue at the CU defense, it is the lack of ability to finish, and no turnovers. Like, they had a couple sacks in this game. I think Keaton Wade had one. They might have had a couple other TFLs in the backfield. Yeah, Preston Hodge had 1.5. London Merritt, some other guys getting in the backfield, but not forcing any turnovers. Is just going to be a big issue if you're consistently losing the turnover battle with the offense kind of coughing the ball up a couple times this past week. So disappointing game for the Buffs. Not one I predicted them to win, but with the way they started, I was impressed with how they looked. But they've got to pick themselves right back off the mat because, like I said, one game left until the bye this week against Iowa State, a number 22 Iowa State team, but it's a vulnerable team, and we're going to get to this in a minute, breaking down the Cyclones team. But they're also coming off a loss, their first of the season at Cincinnati last week. They kind of got run all over. And I think there could be some avenues for the Buffs offense to continue to be efficient. It's just all about not turning the ball over and maybe getting some big plays defensively for the first time, what would feel like a couple weeks. The defense just hasn't been able to force turnovers and some of these big plays in some of the Big 12 games to start the year. So with that being said, we're going to get to Eugene Rapay from the Des Moines Register to take a more in-depth look at this year's Cyclones team. All right, everyone, welcome back to the video. We are back previewing Colorado against Iowa State this Saturday, 1:30 p.m. Mountain Time, kickoff on ESPN. And to do so, we always like to bring in somebody who covers the opposing team, and we've got Eugene Rapay from the Des Moines Register, covers Iowa State. Eugene, how's it going?
It's going good. It's going good. How are you doing? Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's always great to connect with the people who cover these Big 12 programs. It's nice to have a nice classic Big 8 matchup this week. These two programs haven't met, I think, since 2010 was the last time. So it's nice to have kind of a little bit of a renewed rivalry here for both of these teams, and it's an important game for both sides. Obviously, as I mentioned at the top of the video, CU coming off another disappointing loss. I mean, it was a game I expected them to lose at TCU last week, but with just the way things unfolded, jumping out to a big lead once again, second straight week that they lead 14-0 in the first half, and then they end up losing by 2 touchdowns against the Horned Frogs. Just another game where they felt like similar script. And now for Iowa State, they're ranked number 22 in the country, have been one of the better teams in the Big 12 to start the year, but suffered that first loss last week at Cincinnati. Eugene, just kind of what was your big takeaway from the game? Obviously 38-30, Cincinnati pulls away to win. Iowa State was down 17-0 early in that game and rallied to get to single digits, but not able to ultimately get back. Just kind of what was your takeaway from seeing Iowa State lose for the first time this year?
Yeah, the biggest takeaway for me especially was just how disappointing the defense came out in that first half, allowing 31 first half points against Cincinnati, who they were coming in hot. They were surging. You knew that they were playing with confidence. So you expected Brendan Sorsby in that offense to just give Iowa State some fits or just do well. But for Iowa State, whose calling card has always been on the defensive end under John Haycock, to give up that many points, that many yards in the first half was just so disappointing. And also just the missed tackles, just going through the film, there had to have been at least 24 missed tackles. And it wasn't specifically one guy, it wasn't specifically one position group. It was just systematic from top to down, all three position groups from linebackers, secondary to defensive line, just didn't really do their job well. And it showed in the first half as Cincinnati just scored on each of its first 5 drives, just built a massive lead. And fortunately for Cincinnati, they were able to hang on because Iowa State did come back a little bit in the second half, but just the defensive failure from top to bottom just stood out to me.
Yeah, and it was surprising for me to see, I agree. I do like Cincinnati. I think Brendan Sorsby is a good quarterback. He's got some good weapons, as you showed during the game. But I think the surprising fact was that Cincinnati was able to run the ball so well. Obviously, Iowa State is the only other team, along with Colorado, that is, as injured in the Big 12. Like, these are the two longest injury lists in the Big 12 matching up this week. But obviously, the most significant injuries for Iowa State have been the starting 2 corners with Jeremiah Cooper, Jontez Williams, both all Big 12 caliber players. So you thought maybe Cincinnati would be able to throw the ball pretty well, but they rack up 260 rushing yards, 3 touchdowns. The 3 different, including Sorsby and the 2 running backs, 3 guys that had over 60 rushing yards individually. Was that maybe more surprising than anything? Was just seeing, like you said, some of the missed tackles and just not being as sound in cover defending the run?
Yeah, first half there, Cincinnati, I think they ran for 208 yards on the ground, and the average ended up being 10.8 yards per carry, which stood out to me because, sometimes you see a stat like that and it's skewed or it's kind of off kilter a little bit by like a 90-yard run, but it wasn't that. Cincinnati was just consistently getting big chunk plays, 10, 15 yards each time. And it wasn't just one guy. Like Walker was really good. Pryor had a good game. Scoresby was able to scramble a little bit there. And just the physicality that Cincinnati had really stuck out. Like it didn't seem like Iowa State's defense was ready to play. Just guys getting trucked. The defensive line had zero penetration. The holes that Cincinnati was making, you could have driven a tank through them. Forget a truck, a tank, an Abrams M1 tank, and just Iowa State just had a hard time dealing with the run, and that opened up things for the pass as well.
Well, just kind of before we move into diving deep on this Iowa State team on both sides of the ball, just kind of what has been the mood vibes kind of this week in Ames with the program? Just kind of how are they rallying? Because obviously they had such a great start to the season, beating Kansas State in Ireland, getting the rivalry win in Cyhawk. Just kind of how have they responded after this first bit of adversity this year?
So it's disappointing as disappointing as it was for them to lose. They actually came away in pretty good spirits at Cincinnati, which was a little surprising given, the first half was what it was, but then the second half, they were able to fight back and kind of close or kind of narrow that gap a little bit. And just seeing the response on defense, but also on offense, just gave them some encouragement moving forward. But overall for Iowa State, as disappointing as the injuries are, they were in a similar boat last year. It was probably arguably even harder of a situation just with the amount of injuries that they dealt with, to the point where they were playing walk-on linebackers and starting roles. So I think the fact that they've done this before, it's that been there, done that. They went through it last year. They kind of feel optimistic that they can do the same thing again. There were some hitches, as last week was the first game without those two cornerbacks you mentioned. But now moving forward, as they kind of get more time to get guys acclimated, they feel like that they can bounce back.
All right, let's break down this Cyclones team on both sides. I want to start offensively because, the biggest name on the team we haven't even mentioned yet is quarterback Rocco Becht, who seems like he's taking a big step forward now in his, he's multiple years into starting for this program. Just kind of what have you seen from him as he's kind of asserted himself? I mean, last year he was obviously had 2,000-yard receivers to throw the ball to, but this year it's a little bit of a new look offense. They've got a good rushing attack with a pair of running backs, and Rocco can certainly use his legs when needed as well. Just kind of as the certified leader of this offense now for Becht, kind of what have you seen from him his junior year here?
Yeah, for him, I think it's just his ability to continue and contribute in crunch time, or kind of lead or orchestrate that offense that is just so impressive to me. He doesn't make too many mistakes, and then when times are tough or when you're in those close games in the fourth quarter or second half, he somehow seems to elevate his play to a point where the offensive coordinators calling him a psychopath with just how much he loves chaos. Like, it seems like no matter how chaotic or when things get tough, Rocco Becht seems to elevate himself, and that's just a very calming presence to have. But also, you can trust him in those close games or in those tight situations. So for me, just his ability to deliver in the clutch has been most impressive this year.
Obviously, they've also got the running back duo with Hansen and Abusama. This kind of how balanced has it been between those guys, and do you expect that to kind of be the case this week? Because obviously Colorado has struggled defending the run at times. They're a little bit better last week against TCU, but you watch the Georgia Tech game in week 1, Houston game early in the year, and then BYU just 2 weeks ago. Teams are able to kind of get a good push if they have a strong offensive line and can control the line of scrimmage. Is that something you expect Iowa State to try to do this week?
Yeah, I think the run game will play a big role. I think Abusama is coming off of a season-high performance where he ran for 96 yards. He's a guy who has big boom or bust potential. If he dances around the line of scrimmage and gets caught for a 1-yard gain, you wouldn't be surprised. But you also wouldn't be surprised when he's able to shake a defender off or just break loose for a home run play. He's that kind of guy. In terms of it being balanced, that's kind of the approach that they've taken all season. But right now, Carson Hansen is dealing with a concussion. He didn't play in the second half of the Cincinnati game. I don't even think he was on the sidelines for that. So right now, although he's listed as questionable, I feel like he's probably doubtful for Saturday. So we'll see how Sama is able to build off this season-high game. One thing that did jump out at me was the run defense of Colorado. Like, I feel like, right now Colorado ranks in the bottom of the conference in terms of run defense, although they did take some strides, as you said, against TCU. But for me, Abusama will be a guy to watch. And after that, I don't know, like, it's unproven guys, but so far Sama and Hansen were the big carriers on that rushing game.
And then who are the names to know maybe in the passing game? Obviously, I think Buffs fans, when they look at the roster, they'll notice Chase Soul because he was obviously started his career at CU, was a part of that really bad 2022 team. But Chase was a promising freshman on that team before he went to ECU, kind of got his career back on track and has now had a solid season. Who else, is Rocco Becht? Who are his favorite targets kind of in the passing game?
He loves the tight ends, and Iowa State loves its tight ends. They've been using them in every which way, from 2-point conversions, trick plays, to having the tight end go in motion, take the ball, and then heave a 40-yard pass. They'll use them in any which way they can. So Ben Bramer, Gabe Burkle, Tyler Moore, those are guys to watch for. But overall this year, last year Rocco Becht had the luxury of throwing to those 1,000-yard guys, the NFL receivers. This year, he definitely has to spread out a lot more, so the tight ends play a big part. Wide receiver-wise, Chase Sowell has just started to get himself going the last couple of games. But you also have to keep an eye out for a transfer, Xavier Townsend. He's a guy that they also like to use in different ways, from the return game, putting him out in motion, or using him in the slot. He's just an athletic, shifty receiver that when he gets the ball, he can get that those yards after catch yards. And then Brett Eskildson has been having a pretty solid season after playing mostly special teams last year. Dom Overby is another player whose speed, if he can get downfield and hang on to the ball, he has a few drops this year, but when he's able to break loose, break open, his speed is a game breaker for them. So I would say that, many different receivers to watch out for, but all those guys at one point or another this year have delivered big highlight moments or in key plays for Iowa State.
It'll be interesting to see how those tight ends specifically match up against the Buffs linebackers, because I think that's easily the weakest spot of the CU defense is the linebackers. There's plenty of rotation, not too many guys you trust in coverage. A couple guys that can make some plays coming downhill, but that's easily the weakest spot on the Buffs defense. It'll be an interesting matchup on Saturday afternoon for sure. Switching over to the defense, before we get into a game prediction here, just quickly on the defense. Obviously, we mentioned the two corners being out is such a big deal. Who are the playmakers that could make an impact, in this game? Obviously, you mentioned they had a rough week last week, but CU, Cade Salter had a couple of turnovers last week, some really puzzling throws. So I think, Iowa State defense is going to have a chance to make some plays and come up with some turnovers in this game, even if CU kind of leans into the ground game, which they may do. Just who are the names to know? Obviously, I think everyone knows Dominique Orange, got the Big Citrus, is one of the coolest nicknames in all of the Big 12. Just kind of who are the other playmakers that Buff fans should know about on the Cyclones defense?
The safeties have been playing well this year. It's kind of been a little bit of a breakout year, especially for Marcus Neal. He's just been a great run stopper at safety. He's been racking up tackles. Disappointing performance against Cincinnati, but just before that, he'd been off to such a great start this season. Jameson Patton has also made a couple of interceptions and just forced some key turnovers in the red zone, in the clutch, to just make for some big stops. At linebacker, Caleb Bacon has kind of been the defensive leader. He's the guy that they all rally around, and he's a key player to watch there. Cooper Ebel has been leading the team in tackles, but yeah, I would say that those are kind of like the marquee names to watch for. But the cornerbacks who've been filling in so far, like Trey Bell, he's had a couple of games to start. He's played solidly since transferring in from Lindenwood. Quentin Taylor Jr., while he held his own against Cincinnati, it'll be interesting to see as he gets tested more and more as the season goes on how he handles it.
Yeah, Buffs have plenty of playmakers on the perimeter if they trust them and use them. That's kind of the big thing. Amarion Miller had a touchdown in a pretty big game against TCU. Sincere Brown can really burn if he gets in space. Joseph Williams is another guy who can go up and make a play. So I think all three of those guys and those matchups in the secondary will be interesting to watch as well. So this has been a great conversation, Eugene. Great look at this. Before I get you out of here, I want to get your take on how you think this game is going to go. I mean, Colorado obviously a 2.5-point underdog going into this one. I think it started out at 4.5 points, and it's come down to 2.5. I mean, like I said, both these teams have a lot of injuries, and maybe Iowa State isn't as obviously as healthy as they were earlier in the year when they probably would have been a bigger favorite against CU. Over under is 52.5, so expecting some points in this game. But how do you think this game could go this week? I mean, it's such a huge game for both sides, because Iowa State obviously still has aspirations to compete for a conference championship, just like they did last year. Buffs still win this in the Big 12, just trying to get their season back on track. And if they fall to 2-5 after this game, heading into a bye week, I mean, it's going to be a very interesting second half of the year here in Boulder for sure. But give me your take. What do you think? How do you think this game could play out?
I think it'll be a trickier one than expected. I think I look at that BYU game when BYU came, and just Colorado I think they're better than their record indicates. I feel like inconsistency has been like the biggest issue, just like not being able to finish games.
Yeah.
But Iowa State's defense right now is just so wounded, and coming off a performance like that doesn't really instill much belief on that side of the ball. But Rocco Becht has kept that offense going, so I do expect some points here. I think this will be a high-scoring one. If I were to guess a final score, I think Iowa State pulls away in the second half, wins 35-24.
That's a good one. I actually think it's going to be a pretty tight game as well. I think we're going to get points, like you said. And the reason I'm going to pick Iowa State in a very tight game is because of what you said earlier with Rocco Becht and just kind of his clutch gene that he seems to have found the last couple of years, and the ability to make plays in the fourth quarter. You just have to trust the Cyclones more than the Buffs late in games, like we've talked about. Even though Iowa State is coming off a loss, they've just proven it more throughout this year and even last year that they can, with this group, that they can win close games. And the Buffs, just like we've talked about, have not been able to finish lately. So I'm going to go 31-28 Iowa State on a game-winning field goal with a drive orchestrated by Rocco Becht. They'll get the ball with a couple minutes left, go down the field, and then ice it with a couple of first downs and get in good field goal position to win it on a game-winning kick. So I think we're going to get a good one this week at Folsom Field, and that's my pick. So, but Eugene, I appreciate you doing this. This was a great look at this important game this week, and thanks for doing this again.
Yeah, thanks again for having me on, and looking forward to Saturday.
All right, that'll do it from this video or this edition of our Buffs preview. I recapped the TCU game a little bit at the top. Thanks again to Eugene Rapay from the Des Moines Register. Make sure to go follow him on Twitter over at eRapay5 for all of his Iowa State coverage leading up to this game. And like I said, we'll have plenty of coverage on the channel after Saturday's game in Boulder. Thanks everybody for watching, and stay tuned for what's next.